Well, when you talk about relationships, what are the qualities and characteristics that contribute to those relationships?
Memories, making memories together, having experiences together, going through things together, spending. There's no such thing as quality time without quantity time. Let me just make that perfectly clear. There's no such thing as quality time without quantity time. Because you can't pick when that special moment's going to come. So you have to spend time with people. And I've had a lot of folks, really successful people, who you would think would have this figured out, just say to me like, how do you make friends? You know how you make friends? You start by being a friend. Yeah.
Welcome to Y'all Street. Today we speak with Britt Harris, investing legend and the founder of the Titans program. Y'all want a cup of coffee?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, please.
This one here is for Britt. I got you guys some special coffee mugs with the Titans logo.
Oh,
so thank you. Yeah, Titans cups.
We're here. Beautiful. Hey, coffee cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Have you here in College Station?
Yeah, break a leg.
So we're healing the divide in the country by actually having an Aggie graduate and a Longhorn graduate here at the same table. And so why don't we start with that? What is the tie that binds? It's the Titans program, right? And so I'm interested in hearing about the Titans program, Britt, and how you started it and how these two gentlemen got involved.
Titans started probably 30 years ago in my mind. And you look back and there are things that happen to you along the way that kind of add up, and all of a sudden you get this crescendo moment that brings everything together. So the first thing was I was mentored by a man named Bob Buford, who was a media guy and had some tragedy in his life and restructured everything. And I don't remember everything that Bob said, but I remember one really important thing, which was he said to us, and it wasn't just me, that success is not the top of the ladder. I'm 32 or 33, and I'm kind of thinking I'm going to ignore this guy. So what is the top of the ladder? And he said, significance is more important than success. And now that I'm 67, I can definitely say that he was correct. So success is not the top of the ladder, but it's not unimportant either. But there's a higher level, which is significance. And he gave us a really good model. He said, look, we're all early 30s. He said the first half of your career is about success, that it properly defined. It's not about making $1 billion, although there's, if you can handle it, there's nothing wrong with it, but that's not the primary goal. The primary goal of the first half of success is, finding the right person to marry, starting to have a family if that's what you want to do, and being a good father or mother, developing a strong, reputation in the community, becoming a master at something, building some resources, whether it's financial resources or, personal resources. It's also about making mistakes. And so Bob actually wrote a book after he'd spoken to us, and he called it Halftime. And so the concept is, you live the first half for success, the things I talked about, in the right way. And then when you get to in the middle part of your career, and that could be anywhere in your 40s. Ours happened to be literally at 45. You just kind of step out of the river for a second, rather than just being swept along by it, which so many people are. And my wife and I, Julia, and I, said, let's think about what's happened to us up until now. And, first of all, be thankful for all the blessings that we've had. I mean, Lord's been very good to us. Think about the mistakes that we made and what we've learned from them. And then say, we played the first half for success. It was like a football game. The first half we played, we used a running game, and it's got us here. Now we're going to step out, when we come out of this halftime experience, we're going to go to a passing game. We're going to really focus on doing things that are significant and not just things that are success. And that really changes your perspective on things. It doesn't mean that I just kept working in the financial industry. I went to a public fund rather than being at Bridgewater and things like that, but markets are the markets. And probably the biggest thing that we did was come up and start Titans. I thought about, what do I like to do? I like, teaching. I wanted to teach something that was unique. And if you look at, I do this both at Texas A&M and at UT, and you tell me if what is unique, what can you do that they're not already doing? I mean, that is a tough question. But what we came down to was wisdom and relationships. That, college is particularly about developing technical competence. And had a conversation with Mr. Casper here and his buddy Andrew Robertson when they were interns with me, and I asked them about their college experience. And their answer was so foreign to me, I thought, well, we got to do something here, because their answer was, well, first of all, we passed out of some unbelievable number of hours. I'm thinking, why even go to school? And then they talked about the classes they took and the grades that they make and the clubs that they were associated with. And I said, well, did you make any friends? Like, did you? And of course, these are both very outgoing people and they make friends easily. But to make a 4.0 or 3.9 or whatever, I mean, that's no matter what people say, they're working hard and it's taking a lot of their time. And so I thought about but it's, it's a tyranny now that you have to have a certain grade point to get the right first job, quote unquote. Of course, it doesn't matter at all really in the long run what your first job is, although it's better to have somebody who's a good boss and growing. But that's just kind of like kindergarten. It's not going to just define what you're going to be, 20 years later, but people think it does at the time. So I thought about what would I have said? And so they're way over here on the performance spectrum, so incredibly focused on their grades. And I have 4 kids. I want to make good grades, but I don't want them to sacrifice everything, for that. And, my generation, we're way over here on this side about, did anybody go to class today? It wasn't that bad, but I just thought my first reaction would have been all the people that I ran around with and all the experiences that we had together that formed these long-term relationships. And then somebody said, well, did you actually get a job? And so, yeah, I guess I did get a job. And so relationships trump everything. People trump everything. You get the right to work with people because, initially you're technically competent. But let me ask you, if I give you 2 choices, you have a boss who's really technically competent, but not that wise, or you have a boss that's sufficiently technically competent, but super wise, which one are you going to go for?
Oh, the latter.
Yeah.
Well, when you talk about relationships, what are the qualities and characteristics that contribute to those relationships?
Memories, making memories together, having experiences together, going through things together, spending. There's no such thing as quality time without quantity time. Let me just make that perfectly clear. There's no such thing as quality time without quantity time. Because you can't pick when that special moment's going to come. So you have to spend time with people. And I've had a lot of folks, really successful people, you would think would have this figured out, just say to me like, how do you make friends? You know how you make friends? You start by being a friend. Yeah.
In time for many successful people is at a premium. I mean, that's the one thing that you have the least of.
Yeah.
And people shortchange exercise, sleep, time with family. They spend a lot of time at work. And so what you're talking about is really kind of antithetical to what it means for most high-performing executives in the corporate world. So
it sounds like it's counterproductive because you should be doing more technical stuff. That is just not the case. It's a long ride. And as you get further and further up in the hierarchy of things, it's like everybody's moving up together. So, you're the number one guy, your company, and my company. And if we establish a relationship when we're 30, we're going to have that same relationship when we're 40, 50, 60. And everybody has problems. Whether you're rich, poor, whether you're powerful or not powerful, there's nobody on the planet who doesn't have problems. But the people who walk in those shoes have problems that other people don't have. And you need somebody that you can talk to who doesn't just say, hey, you're paid a lot of money, suck it up. You always need what goes on in your head needs to come out of your mouth. This is super important because what's in your head sounds really scary, and you put it out of your mouth, it doesn't sound that scary. What's in your head sounds really smart. You put it out of your mouth, that's not really that smart. And you need somebody that you can trust to do that with. And so people, and this depends a lot on whether you're how extroverted and introverted you are. So you have to sort of make that caveat. But what I really stress in Titans is the accumulation of friendships, not serial friendships. Not I had 2 friends here and then I moved to another town and I left these guys behind. I got 2 more and then I changed jobs and I left them behind. No, you have 2, 4, 6. If you just make 2 or 3 new friends, every year, you're going to have 50, 60, 100 friends by the time you get, to the age that I am. And that's probably the biggest regret that people have when they get to the age that I am and say, I didn't do that along the way. I didn't do it with my family, so therefore my family relationships are weak. I didn't do it with friends, so therefore I don't have a peer set. And it's the people that really matter.
So, Jason, how did you meet Britt, and how did you respond when he was asking you these questions coming out of school and those early conversations about talking about the Titans program? What was that like?
Yeah, so I was from the age of 13. My goal was to make it to New York, Wall Street, the financial world, et cetera. And I remember, going down through the A&M process of trying to get an internship. And Texas A&M has an unbelievable constituency on Wall Street, but it's still small. We're in Texas. It's not an Ivy League program. And so you work through the network. A&M has an unbelievable Aggie network where Aggies really help promote other Aggies. And I remember hearing about this guy named Britt Harris, A&M graduate, very successful in the finance world. It was a gentleman named Ty Popwell gave me his email address, and I just emailed him and was shocked to have an email back to me and to his HR. He's like, looks like an Aggie, looks like a good guy, make sure you interview him. And what I didn't know at the time was they had already accepted an interview and already accepted a candidate. Britt mentioned him named Andrew, and they usually only took one intern. But because Britt emailed, they said, we'll interview a second candidate, if you will. And so I get up there, get to New York, and, first few days. And then Britt Harris, who's the CIO of the organization, most interns never interact with the CIO, comes in and is like, hey, you're coming with me home this weekend. And I'm like, coming home with you this weekend?
Scary.
a little bit. I'm like, I don't know this guy. I don't know his family. What's the situation?
I need my lawn mowed.
and what was even scarier was the Friday comes and I'm walking with him and he throws me the keys and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm driving this vehicle in nowhere, Connecticut, to his house, and I'm like, don't go too fast, don't go too slow, don't run through the stop sign. But on that drive was sort of what Britt referenced was the first conversation of trying to get to know me, and of course I answered with academic platitudes and the organizations I was building my resume and talking about my career and all that kind of stuff. And he just goes, stop. You got it all wrong. And it wasn't, I didn't have a light bulb moment then, but over the course of that summer, and then, cause I went to his house multiple times and, hung out with him multiple times. And actually one of the key, maybe where it all clicked was, I had an end of summer, presentation that I've been working on, and I was pouring my heart into it, right? My direct boss was going to be there. Britt was going to be there. And I had all of it lined out, and Britt contacts me and says, hey, we want to do a dinner at my house on the last night. I was like, no, I can't. I got to do this presentation thing. And he's like, Jason, are you going to remember the presentation in 20 years? Or are you going to remember the time at my house in 20 years? Come to my house and the presentation will take care of itself, sort of thing. And I would say that's sort of when the sort of light bulb sort of went on, if some of the wisdom that Britt, is referencing.
And so the very next year is when you launched Titans Class 1?
Yes, because there's such a great need for it.
After you met Jason, you said, forget it, I'm dropping everything and starting Titans.
Yeah.
No, and so that first class then, you're putting together the curriculum. You have to bring together some students to interview for the program. How many students were in that first class, and how did you?
A&M, 12. 12 students were in the first class. That's just coincidental. And they were all experimental. Charis Casper was in that group.
Yep.
And, when I proposed this, first of all, I didn't know if I'd be any good at it. I didn't know if the students would like it. Didn't know if the faculty would approve of it. So I just suggested, let's just do one semester and just see how it goes. And I got 12 students. We had no idea what we're doing. We barely, like 20 years later, it's pretty much the same. But we modeled it after a Ben Franklin concept called June Tao. And June Tao is a club for mutual self-improvement. Franklin had, I think, 12 or 13 guys that he met with every Friday night. And the idea was to help people improve, themselves personally, help the group improve, and help the community do things. And Franklin said that this was really the most important thing he did for his entire life. Now, in these groups, I have this special privilege of being able to select the students myself. This is not normal. And so, we try to try to get the students in who have the highest level of character and they have the highest ability. So our first criteria is that somebody that we trust thinks you'll be very successful in business relatively early in your career. Saying, well, why does it have to be early? Because I'm 67. That's why. I want to see this happen. But there's it's not a dime a dozen. There's just so many people that can become successful. I can talk about it later about just 2 or 3 things. If you have them, you're gonna be unusually successful. But so that's a lot of people. The second one is you have to have the kind of character that shows us that everything that you achieve and all the rewards that you get are not just about you. That we just had, at the time I was thinking about this, we were going through the WorldCom situation and Enron, and I was with a company that had just sold itself to another company, and they fired every single person in the company except for me and one other person. And I was just really concerned about the type of leadership that we had. And so I wanted to help build a better type of leader. So we call it narrow path, which we can get into later. So that's the second one. The third is that you have to be a fully engaged person. And so a lesson here is in every organization, there are 3 types of people. This is managerial science. There are 3 types of people. There are fully engaged people, partially engaged people, and terrorists. So fully engaged, partially engaged, and terrorists. So what would you guys, what does it mean? What's the difference between somebody what's a fully engaged person, and what percentage of an organization do you think you should assume are actually fully engaged? I don't care where you are, what company you're with, how elite you think you are, these stats still apply.
Oh, I was just in the program, so I don't want to cheat and give away the answer.
I would say 20% are fully engaged.
30% is the answer. Only 30% are fully engaged. So remember I talked to you a minute ago about there's just a few things that you can do that will make you see. Just get fully engaged, and that will distinct that one thing. Like every day, I show up to work, whether the work is really interesting or not really interesting, whether it's small or large. I just have my headlights on all the time, and I'm just, if you try to be fully engaged, your mind will be on, all those kind of things. And believe it or not, only 30% of people are fully engaged. This is worldwide. So people say, I can't ever be successful. Well, get fully engaged. If you're not successful, you're probably not fully engaged. You should check yourself on that. Then you have people who are partially engaged, which is 50% of the people. And some people it's rational for some people not to be fully engaged. It's kind of like, I just want to do a nice job in this area right here. I don't want to become the CEO. I'm not in it for, to make a bunch of money or have a lot of influence. I'm just here to pay the bills. And they do a great job with what they're doing. But they don't really feel like they have to bring 100% all the time. But then there's some people just can't get fully engaged for some reason. I'll give you an example. I had a guy working with me, and he's a PhD from MIT in aerospace engineering.
So not particularly intelligent.
Not at all. The super intelligent guy. And so I wanted to build a model for us. And so I went over there and I kind of helped him, get started. And it was kind of like, getting where he's up and running. And then I was kind of like, look, you're up and running now. I got other people I got to deal with. So are you good to go? And he said he was, but when it came back, he just can't sustain it. So, and you got to know this as a good boss. Because then the last part are the 20% are terrorists. So, what kind of person would be a terrorist in your company?
Somebody that undermines the culture, someone that is pulling in the opposite direction.
Yeah, and they don't fight out in the open. They fight around the water cooler, or let's go to lunch, and they sit in meetings and don't say anything. But as soon as the meeting's over, that was really stupid. And normally they're the most narcissistic people you have in your company. Something has happened where they didn't get what they wanted, and one of the things that we humans are all genius at. There's one thing that every human being on the planet is genius at. What do you think it is? Justifying that we're good. Justifying that we're right, justifying that we're good. And so the only way they can justify that they're right and good is the company has to be bad. And so when I've managed 8 different companies now, and I didn't obviously always know this, but my first goal is to make that ratio 50-50-0. And not all terrorists are bad. Some are, but not all. Sometimes it's my fault. I thought they were in the right spot and they did everything they could and they tried really hard, but it just wasn't, we were wrong. And so anybody's in that category, you do everything you can to make sure that they land somewhere else, that's really good for them. Anybody who's been around for a while knows that it's never, that's the worst part of the job. But I don't know, the third of the time, or maybe a little bit more, you'll see that person again 5 years later, and they'll say the best thing that happened was, they were able to get out of where they were and get to some place where they really could succeed.
So you began sharing some of these insights with this Titans Class 1, the first 12, and the group got together a couple times a month in the evenings.
Got together pretty much every week.
Every week,
Yeah.
Okay. And so was this a accredited class?
Yeah,
or
of course, yeah.
Okay.
So it was elective.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really funny because I was very new to dealing with academia, and obviously it's overall it's just fantastic, but I had no idea how siloed it was. So when I said I just want the highest character, highest ability students, I meant in the whole school. I didn't mean just in the finance department.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they said, well, okay, we'll do it for the whole business school. And I kept saying, I said anywhere. So they said to me, well, okay, maybe we could do one from the economics department. and I said, we'll start there. And then they asked me, do I know anybody over there? No, I don't know anybody over there. You're the academics. They don't know one another across the spectrum. Of course, when you're going to be successful in your work later on, you got to know things across the spectrum. And so this class now will have engineers, people in government, people in political science, people in computer science, obviously people in business. And it really just makes a much better class when you have that kind of breadth of experience. And the engineers come in with it's got to be done just right, but they don't know anything about business. The business people know something about business, but maybe they're a little slippery in terms of how they present things. But the goal of the class is that they learn a material, which I then say it's not going to happen. The material is super important, and it's not difficult. But college is not about learning.
It's about memorizing.
It's about memorizing something so you can pass a test. And, I'm not arguing with it. We just have to accept it for what it is. Because you got to get that certain GPA. And so there's a thing called strategic learner. And the strategic learner has more emphasis on the first word than the second word. Their strategy is to get a high GPA, not to learn. And this is how you score points in college. I made an A, that's 7 points. And that's the game that you are playing in college, and so you want to win that game. But there was an experiment in Northern Europe where they had this class. Let's just say it was 100. Take a test, and what the class didn't know is they were also going to be part of this research experiment. And the research experiment was that they would later on carve out all the people who made A's. So let's just say 10 made A's out of the 100. And a month later, the chancellor, sent them a note saying, please meet in my office. So they all show up in the office, and he said, you recognize people, you're all in the same class, and you guys who made A's. I'm sure they thought they were going to get a scholarship or some funding. Instead, he said, here's Dr. and Mrs. Adam Smith, and that, in their hand, they had the same test that you took a month ago. Exactly the same test. And here's 10 number 2 pencils, and there's 10 desks, and the test was 45 minutes. Take it in. What do you think happened?
Not everyone got A's.
They failed.
Yeah, everybody failed. Nobody got an A. I think the highest grade anybody got was a C, because they didn't feel. I don't need to know this after the test is over, because my whole reason is to pass the test. And by the way, I got another test 3 days later or 2 days later, so I got to move on. When I was probably 25 or 26, Earl Nye, who's a famous Aggie, I was fortunate to work for, I'm in a little cubicle, and all of a sudden he's sitting there, and comes in and says, Harris, I'm unhappy with our dividend, and I want you to look at this and give me a recommendation on Friday. And he leaves. What do you think I was thinking? I was thinking, we have a dividend? And there are policies about it, so I rode the bus back and forth from downtown Dallas. And I thought, I didn't sell all my books. I kept a few. I kept 3 of them. I wonder if there's anything about dividend policy in those books. So I get back, I see it now. It's green and red, of course. Pull it down, look at table of contents, chapter 5, dividend policy. I'm going, what? Why? This is obviously important. Why would we skip this chapter? I turned to chapter 5. I'm an over highlighter. I don't know how you guys are, but it's all highlighted. But I thought I never bought a new book. And then I noticed scribbling all over the page. And everybody has unique handwriting. I certainly do. And there was no doubt that I had been there, and I dwelt on that page. And guys, I could not conjure up, as hard as I tried, any memory whatsoever that I'd ever seen this before. I just went through the motion. I got through it. But that day, because now I'm in the game, it makes a huge difference when you're in the game as opposed to when you're in practice. Mm-hmm. So now on Friday, I've got to report. Now, let me just say before I say this, dividend policy is not like the most riveting subject. But when you've got an order from the CEO and 3 days to figure it out, it is very riveting. And so what I passed but never learned, now every single, oh my gosh, there's 4 or 5 different types of dividend policies. You're kidding. Oh, this, I think this is the one. It just lights up, because you're in the game. So that's, they meet a lot of really great people, and they probably remember the people more than the message.
Well, I was just gonna mention that is you mentioned at the outset the importance of forming relationships and memories, and unique to you, unlike most professors, is being in the corporate world and CEO of Bridgewater and your time at Verizon, Timco, and TRS. You're connected with all of these powerful and influential and experienced executives that you then bring into the program and create these lasting memories. And it's probably a good segue to kind of pull you in here, Evan, because you just recently graduated from the Titans class at UT.
I don't know if you graduated, but
well, you somehow snuck out. What was your experience like? What was the journey like? Why did you want to be part of Titans? What had you heard about Titans, and explain what the experience in the program was?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it started a relationship. I had a friend who was a year older than me, who I respected a lot, who had told me, you have to take this Titans class, you get free food. Because Britt
that's a big draw.
Takes us out to dinner, right? After every single class. And
also not common amongst most professors.
No, absolutely not. He said, you get free food, and this professor, you call him by his first name, Britt. And I was like, that's good enough for me, kind of all I need to know, pretty easy. But he had also said a lot of things about, you talk about technical skills, but he cares about you as a person. And so, it was my last semester of college. I was like, yeah, why not? I'll interview for this class. So I go through the interview process, and I remember it had asked me what the most recent book that I read was. And at Casper Companies, we read a lot. Before that, I did not read a lot, but I had just read Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis, and I was like, thank the Lord that I just read this. So I wrote about that. I answered a couple other questions. I went to the interview where actually I met Jason, and somehow got in the program. And I think that the biggest thing that stuck out to me from the get-go is a lot of times there's either this obsession with ambition, an obsession with success, or there's almost a demonization of it, of it's a bad thing. And I think what Britt did is he says, I want highly competent people. I want people who have a high ceiling, and I'm going to use what they've already built, those high GPAs and this work ethic that they have. I'm going to use what they've built, but I'm going to tell them what really matters is the relationships, is the people, is the integrity, is your moral standards, how you treat people, how you love your neighbor. And if I can combine those two things, then I can have a part, and a significant part, in sending out men and women into the workforce who not only have the technical or the just competence to do really well, but change people's lives because they matter. And that was the overarching lesson that was taught over and over and over again. And then we also got some pretty awesome people came in.
Like who came into the program?
We had Robin Diamante, very successful CIO, and
he runs a $100 billion fund.
And we talked about China. We talked about climate change. We talked about AI. We talked about things that mattered. And Britt has a way of talking about financial history that's pretty mesmerizing. I was telling you this last night. And you sit there and you listen for 2 hours and you go, oh, that makes sense.
So, Jason, Evan just mentioned that you were involved in the interview process. So, Britt brings back former Titans to come and interview the new classes. What was it about Evan that you felt made him a good candidate for the program?
I'm interested to hear this.
Yeah, so the process is you have to be recommended by a professor or current Titan or someone connected with the Titans program. I mean, back to relationship, Britt believes that, great people know great people, and that is one of the highest endorsements is if a former Titan says, no, this guy or girl will be a potentially great Titan. And then from there, like you said, there's a process and filling out things. But then one of the most important gates is Britt brings back former Titans, does a dinner, and the former Titan sits with somewhere between 8 and 10 of the candidates and just gets to know them. And are they people of character? Are they people of competence? Are they interesting people? Sort of those three. And I remember at the table that Evan was at was a very high quality table. And there were, 4 or 5 who were really sort of Titans potential material, if you will. And you just fill out and say, what the things are that are highlighted. And for, Evan, I think his communication skills, his ability to versatile from topic to topic and have something interesting to add to the conversation. The fact that he was sort of an entrepreneur and already working in business during most of his college career. You don't see that a lot. And so it was, more than anything, it's like, this is an interesting person who's smart, who has competence. He should be considered in the pool, sort of thing.
You talk about communication, and I often say it's one of the most underappreciated skills and one of the least taught skills in school is how do you communicate well? And that ties into the relationship piece. Building relationships is often about being a good listener, being a good communicator, being empathetic, and my experience with the Titans program, having been sort of on the periphery as a sort of an honorary invitee to some of the events, is I feel like that there is a pretty big emphasis on communicating well.
Yeah, and I was just about to say that, and Britt, maybe you can talk a little bit about the Titans Jokes Entertainment Committee, and then the various committees on how basically everyone gets up during the Titans program or during the Titans class.
Yeah, so you're exactly right. There's, we've gotten to where everything is through a computer. It's, people hardly write at all anymore in terms of like full sentences and
text message, shorthand,
and things like that. And there's a tyranny of success in that these young people are terrified of failing, which is a horrible thing to be terrified of, because if you're not willing to fail, you're just never going to go close enough to the line so they're very careful to try to maintain their, like, I know everything. So we start off every class with Titan Entertainment, and I'll select the Titan Entertainment through some trickery. I'll send it out an email, and I write long emails, and 2/3 of the way through it, a little line that says, if you don't, the last 4 people to contact Sharon, my assistant, are going to be Titan Entertainment. And then they'll sing a Willie Nelson song, or they'll have a dance, or they'll do a poem. One of the things we like to do is they have to rap the poem. If would be an example. And they have to go up there and do something that they're not good at. And initially they're kind of very hesitant, but over time you realize, like, look, you're not good at you can be hesitant and look foolish, or you can just dive in and do your best, and people will love it because they know you're not a professional. So you got to kind of penetrate that, because these students, and this goes back to strategic learner, they won't take risks. So, for instance, in school, if one of them said, I love botany, and I don't know why, but I'm not a botany major, and I say, hey, that's fantastic. We have the best botany teacher, in the country, here, and you can take the botany class as an elective. their first question is not going to be, or response is not going to be, oh, fantastic, where do I sign up? You know what their first question is going to be? How many people get A's in there?
Mm-hmm.
And so if the answer is not very many, and it's strictly the botany majors, they're out of there as fast as possible because it upsets their strategy. And we're trying to move people to deep learner. You know, a deep learner is somebody who will be prepared, and he or she may think, no, I'm good. You know, I'm going to make an A or 90 or 95, and they make a 79. If you're a strategic learner, 79 is like slit your wrist time. I'm going to have to go tell mom or dad or somebody, or I'm going to lose my scholarship or whatever it is. They're just petrified. Where a deep learner, which is what they become later on, says, I thought it was a 95. I didn't realize it was only a 79. So therefore, I need to keep going because I'm not where I want to be. And school doesn't really allow for that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Jason uses the word fail. We talk about failure a lot, and any successful entrepreneur, anybody who is a deep learner, must by necessity fail repeatedly. We internally at Casper Companies, we have this expression: plan, do, check, adjust. Whether you are learning how to play the piano or learning how to play the guitar, it's a series of incremental failures until you rise to the top. And I don't think that failing defines people as a failure. And that's what most people fear, is that if I fail, I will be a failure. And I say it's like going to the gym and lifting weights doesn't mean that you're a weightlifter. Even if you go and lift weights 3 times a week, it doesn't make you a weightlifter. So I think part of this is having the confidence and the willingness to take the risk to fail in order to exercise the necessary muscles that it takes to improve. And that also applies to relationships. As we interact with people, certainly there are moments that we regret. There are times that we get angry. There are learnings in leadership throughout the years. And, again, Jason and I talk a lot about the improvements that we systematically try to make every year to become better and better at building those relationships. But that's all built on a string of failures.
Yeah. So when you meet somebody, all 3 of you don't know anything about them, you've just met them, do you assume that they're fantastic, or you say, I don't really know about this person, I'll have to wait to see what they're capable of?
That's an interesting question.
I don't know. Probably leaning towards the second. I think the first impression matters more than I would like it to. Then I would like to admit, if I really like the person the first time I meet them, over the moon, greatest person ever. If I'm like, then it's harder to overcome that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think this is going to sound superficial, but I think much of it depends on how the person appears and interacts in the first couple of minutes. You kind of make these immediate decisions as to whether or not you think this person is capable and competent or not. When the first time that I met you, like within the first minute, I said,
blown away?
No, not quite blown away. I felt like you were a charity case that, for philanthropic reasons, we should bring on board the company.
So me on pro bono.
Jason, what are your thoughts?
I probably lean towards the second. I think today, in today's world, and we haven't even talked about all the direction it is with AI and all that kind of stuff, it builds in doubt and questions and all that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, I think that's when you meet somebody, and especially as even as you climb up the ladder, you see a lot of people trying to get something from you, if you will. And, it's like, okay, what's their angle? And then if I can figure out their angle, then open up to, move towards the first if they're an amazing person. But that's probably my honest answer.
So the better answer is answer number 1. Regardless of how they appear or that you assume the best. For one reason is they will live up to what you assume. Maybe nobody else assumes they're the best, but you do. They will live up. They will try to. You're giving them higher standard. They'll live up to what you want. and what really is what in the end is makes them so much happier and so much better. Probably the most common thing in people today is low self-esteem. People do not need another person to tell them that I doubt you, or you made this mistake or that. We don't need another person to tell us. We got a whole society of people who are critics and do that. We don't have enough encouragers. Encouragement is the lowest gift. And you know what encouragement, what it stands for? To instill courage into somebody. It's not really complicated. Encourage. I'm going to try to put encourage into the three of you. You're not going to do that by, thinking, when you prove yourself, then I'll start paying attention to you. You have to, I believe, and everybody can have their own opinion, you have to set this higher standard and encourage them to live up to it. Now, the downside with that is sometimes you get really badly hurt. But it's a way lower percentage than you think it would be in the beginning.
And this isn't with somebody that you're just meeting, but at Casper Companies is something we've tried to codify, right? Through, we say it all the time, assume good intent, right? And because what I think you find is that most people want to please the other person in front of them, want to win. And so if you assume good intent, sort of what you were referencing, it brings up the other person to a winning standard and opens your mind to things that you may not be able to see otherwise.
I think I can attest to that too, with all three of you being mentors of mine and spending significant time with me. I think before I met Britt and then started working at Texas Precious Metals and Casper Companies, sure, you have confidence in yourself because you can get a good grade, but nobody really other than your family has taken that level of emphasis in you. And the fact that you show up into this class with Britt Harris and a lot of very, very highly competent other kids of your peers that you have been in class with them and just how amazing these guys are. And he has you talk about markets. He has you talk about investing. He has you make mock hedge fund portfolio. He does all this stuff. And he instills this level of confidence in you. And it's been just adjacent to that of my time working here. You say like, yeah, maybe I can do it. Maybe I can do that. And there's a level of course, confidence, not cockiness. But from a younger person's perspective, I don't think that you can downplay how important that is and how many more people need that and how much I have just been blessed by it.
Britt, would you say that in society, the trend is towards greater insecurity at the individual level?
There's no question.
And is that
that's highly documented?
And I'm wondering maybe some of the causes. Maybe you can pontificate as to the reasons. But it strikes me that when families have gotten smaller and have spread out throughout the world, and historically, you'd live in a village or you'd live in a community and you'd have your grandparents around and your parents and your neighbors and your friends, and you'd grow up in this structure. And that structure, that community built and kind of created a sense of security for you and helped establish that confidence. And the communication was very verbal. The relationships were very intimate. And today, with technology, as we talked about, people being alone, we can sit in the same room and everybody is on their phones. Community is much more dispersed. Even the suburban pre-planned communities, you might not even know the neighbors right next to you. I'm curious if these factors have contributed to students coming out of college with greater and greater feelings of insecurity.
Sure. Just think about how friend has been redefined. You friend somebody that makes you really you friend somebody that makes you an intimate friend. Oh, but I've got 5,000 people who friended me. That's not accurate. The whole point of Titans, really, there's so many different ways we can say it, is to get you to think correctly. And we're talking about a low self-esteem. That's not an accurate picture of who you are. It's like you're trying to see over here, but your head's looking this way. We got to get it back over here. It's not an accurate picture of who you are. And it's a limiting picture. And the more you continue down that path, the more you're lying to yourself and limiting your maximum capacity and your joy in life. And who wants to go around like this all the time? So I'll tell a story that Harvard came and wanted to benchmark Titans. Get that phone call, and I'm kind of like, well, shouldn't this be the other way around? But they came down and they watched the class, and then the professor came to the dinner at our house, and then these students leave at ungodly hours. So like 11:30 at night, or finally everybody's gone, and he and I are sitting on the back patio, and I said to him, so what do you think? And he said to me, there's no comparison. Now, one of the things we try to teach is never be defensive. Always be curious, never be defensive. But I think he's going to tell me that my students don't compare well to his students, and I'm about to be a little defensive. And he said, well, number one, your students are working together. And my students, I said, well, what do your students do? And they work against each other. And I've got 4 case studies at Harvard, and I've taught at Harvard many times. And I love Harvard students, but that's the way they set it up. Now, if my mother died and I missed the class, and I asked you guys to show me your notes, maybe one of the 3 of you might show them to me. So that didn't surprise me. But then he said, your students have healthy self-esteem. And I said, well, yeah. Like, what do your students have? These are the ones that got through the little keyhole that everybody's trying to get through. Are you telling me that they're arrogant? What are you trying to say? He said, no, most of them have low self-esteem. And it didn't make sense to me at first. He said, that doesn't compute. How could these people who have this high achievement have low self-esteem? And he leaned back and he said, well, Britt, you got to think about how they got there. And in my sports terminology, the kid went out for the soccer team in the 7th grade and didn't make it. And somebody said, are you kidding me? That's not even a good team. What's wrong with you? And then the next year they went out again and they made the team. And the person said, so you're a starter, right? Not a starter? What's wrong with you? And then the next year they're a starter. Are you the highest scorer? No. What's wrong with you? You're a high scorer. Are you all district? What's wrong with you? So they climbed this ladder and they never achieve any approval. So they get really high achievements, but they were never good enough. And it is a real tyranny. Because if you have a bad boss and he knows anything about, how to manipulate people, and you have, you don't feel like you're good enough, which, what do they call that? Survival or something like that. Imposter syndrome, like you're always like, I'm imposter syndrome. You're not an imposter. That is a lie. But you have to call it for what it is. And they really struggle. So I was really surprised by that.
I would love to talk about how you instill courage in Titans, because I don't want it to get misrepresented that you're always just, cheerleading constantly, and that you're giving any level of like false sense of confidence to us. Because I think the way that you actually do it is very interesting, and I would love to hear you talk about it. We talked about our entertainment team and how is going up and singing a song or rapping a poem or doing something that's seemingly silly instill courage in people. Well, it's the first time for a lot of us that you get up in front of your peers and you act a fool. And then after you act a fool, you go out to dinner and you realize like, oh, they don't think less of me. I can have a little fun. And then we have the investment team and we have the economics team who go up and give presentations. And you say before, I'm going to be dead honest with you guys, and I'm doing it because I love you, because one day you're going to be in this position where you're presenting to a board or something, and if I don't do this now, you're going to get berated in that time. And so you instill courage not through just, blind optimism, but you instill courage through showing us kind of hardship and being completely honest with us and telling us that the only reason I'm doing this and that I'm being hard on you is because I believe in you and I love you and I know you can do it. And by the end of the class, the investment team is going up and having amazing presentations.
Yeah,
the whole class wants to get up for entertainment and rap a poem. It's amazing how you do it.
Well, it's super important. And so I'll give you an example and also a best practice. The most important thing that I ever put into any company was something I did at the very end. So I'm big in culture. Great companies have defined cultures that are extreme. And you either feel great about it or you don't fit in. So I'm really big on culture. And normally I try to let it come from the bottom up. What do you guys want the culture to be? And then they'll say what they want, and then I'll modify it based on some experience. And we never have a culture until 90% of the people vote that they abide by it, not 100. We're not going to wait for the last person to get on the train. But, and there's a scripture that says, speak the truth with love. And if I were to say one thing to do that's totally transformative, is to put this into your life and into your family and into your culture. Speak the truth with love. 5 words, and nobody can do all 5 of them. Because it's 3 different things. Do you speak? Do you get your voice out there? And that's the biggest problem. Most people, they for confidence reasons or energy reasons, or maybe people won't let them, whatever the deal is, they just never speak. They might be able to tell the truth and they might be able to say it with love, but it doesn't matter. These people need to realize it doesn't matter, because if you don't get it out there, you're not contributing. The second one is you hold yourself accountable for truth. Now, I'm the chairman of a group called the San Jacinto Project, which was like the top 100, Americans are involved in the energy transition. And these are very strong-willed people, scientists and so on. And so we said we're going to have everybody speak. And when you go to speak and present, you're going to say ahead of time, this is my story or this is a fact. Because we're very interested in your story, but people think they have to portray their story as an absolute fact or nobody's going to listen to them. So, and we do the same thing if you're a really strong-willed person and you're good at speaking, you can make things sound like facts. They're just your opinion. We're interested in your opinion, but we don't want to. And then the last one is you can do it with love. So you have a lot of people who speak, they stick to the truth, but the way they say it is so off-putting that it doesn't matter. So for me, I want to speak, I want to stick to the truth, and I want to try to say it with love. And that's 5 words. If every single person in your company or any company or in your family did just those 5 words, the sky would be the limit. And, so in this situation, I'm thinking about a time that, it happened to be the interns that we had, and they were all going to make a presentation. And the first person to make the presentation was a guy named Jose. And I happened to know that Jose was going to be in Titans in the following semester. And he went up and he's a fantastic young man. But the presentation was horrible. And I raked him over the coals. Normally, there were special circumstances like these. I was going to see him again, so I knew that these people who were observing would never, if I didn't do it right then, they would never get the benefit. But, people in my company rightfully came to me and said, I don't see how that's speaking the truth with love. And yet it is. Because the last 10%, most people will not give you the last 10%. Because that's the emotional part. That's the part where I would have to say something to you that you don't want to hear. And it's chaotic and it's messy. And so, unless somebody really cares about you and really loves you, they're not going to go into that last 10%. But if they know that you care about them and they know that you love them, you can go there. Doesn't make it like super fun, but you can go there. But you always want, like, did you give me the last 10%? What are you holding back? The one thing that I don't know, this is too sensitive to tell you, because that is where the big issues are.
I talk to the team a lot about friendship and relationship and culture, and these are all themes that you're touching on. And one of the things that I say is, friendship starts with investment. So you were saying earlier that today everybody's referred to as a friend. You get a like in social media, and that's your friend. But true friendship actually requires some risk, some time, some energy, some effort. And the outcome of that is that you're able to know who your friends are when their joys are your joys and their failures are your failures and their problems are your problems.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you say speak the truth with love, I think that's why it's so important, is because you want to help that friend avoid this roadblock or this problem. You want to invest and see them be successful so that you can celebrate with them and their joys. And it's something I think we all should work on and are working on every day. And probably a good segue into just maybe kind of wrapping up the Titans portion of this discussion with just the outcome. So
Yes,
we're celebrating, you're celebrating 20 years of Titans. What has been the result?
Yeah, it's been incredible. First of all, Titans is not a class. It's an entry into a network. It started at A&M and expanded to UT. I did it at Baylor for a little while because my daughter was going there. And, this is like compound interest. The 20 this semester, 40, 20, now 20 years, we just crossed 1,000 Titans. Hmm. These Titans are in 35 different states and in 7 different countries. They've already started 41 companies, and those companies have a private market value of over $6 billion. No Titan is over 40, unless you're Titan 0. And I would say that the active participation rate of the 1,065 is 80 or 90%. We know where every single one of them is. We know when they get promoted. We know when they get married. We know when they have a child. We know when they have a problem. In 10 more years, it'll probably be one of the most powerful groups going. And remember, they're all trying to be trained to be narrow path leaders. And I want to just spend, before we leave this subject, a little bit on this. I should mention, I know you want me to. This is completely coincidental. It's also produced 41 marriages. So 41 Titan men have married 41 Titan women. So that's about 8% of everybody who's ever come through Titans.
So is that the key selling point for any undergraduate in your life?
So you get free food, you might find a spouse. I mean, it's a good deal. And it's not that surprising because we search the whole university. We say, here are the people with the highest character, and here are the people with the highest ability, and we put them in the second criteria for success was you must become lifelong friends. And I tell them right away, if this doesn't happen, I will flunk you all. Every single person. And boy, this group is motivated by that. And they also, the third one is to build a Titans brand. So one of the things that Ben Franklin's June Tout did was they would write papers for one another. Remember, books were very rare in those days. So, one guy would write a book, something on science, somebody on religion, somebody on politics, whatever. And then they would teach one another. And so I'm sitting there one night late in the office, and the two things that every successful person has, and if you don't have these two, then don't plan to be successful, but you can get them. They're all prolific readers. There's not an exception. And they're all super curious people. Of course, the more when you're reading to get the experiences of other people that you can't get yourself. What we try to emphasize is don't read for information. read for ideas. Don't read Columbus and say, what year did he go over there and all that kind of stuff. Read and say, how did he get people to go to begin with? When they think they're going to sail off the end of the earth, how did he get people in the boat? You know how he did it? He went to the prison and said, you can stay in prison or you can get on the boat. You want to read for ideas. And so we decided that we would, all these people that I know, they're all prolific readers. And if you're a prolific reader, and I know you guys are, and anybody who's listening to this who's a prolific reader, they also have one attribute that I know for sure, and I don't even know them. They feel guilty all the time. Because you just passed, you can't pass that stack of books. I was going to read that. I haven't gotten to it. And so one night I sent out to about 80 pretty iconic people in the country the notion, would you like to sponsor Titans? And I meant sponsor one of the, you give us that top book on your list and we will summarize it for you. I was so naive, I forgot that sponsor is code language for give money. And so I got all these people going, how much do you want? And we don't need money. And so it was great because I was able to go back to these folks who they're always asked for something. They're never given anything. And I said, what we would like to give you is the opportunity to get access to all these briefs, because every single book is written in 10 pages or less, perfectly. That's a whole nother story, but perfectly. And so we now have a library. There's a Titans website people can go to, Titans of Investing. Make sure you get the class version. The school version is good too, but the class version has to meet in it. And we have a place where you can go and see all these briefs, but you have to have the code, and nobody can crack the code. It's Titans. And so, all these things together gets people reading. And how many times have I heard somebody say, no, I didn't read before this, and now I actually like reading.
Me.
Because you're also reading pretty interesting things.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll finish with this. So I tell them beforehand, there's not going to be any tests. Because there's not tests at work. So you're not going to be able to distinguish yourself by cramming for an exam. And you're going to have to decide to prepare or not prepare based just on your interests as opposed to a test. So and this reading is really fascinating. But halfway through, I tell them ahead of time, like halfway through this, I'm going to stop the class and say, I don't think anybody's reading the material. And they'll eventually agree, and I'll say, well, why aren't you reading the material? Is it not as interesting as what you're actually reading? And the answer is no, it's way more interesting. And eventually what I'm trying to get them to learn is only reason I read is because I take a test. And then I have somebody my age at the class, and I'll turn, madam, how long have you been out of school? 30, 40 years. How many tests have you taken since then? Nobody's ever said more than 4 or 5. Most people say 0. And so the message is if the only reason you're going to read is because somebody's going to test you, then most top students go down to what's called routine expert. They just descend back into the population. Because as soon as they don't have the instructions to follow and the commands, they're not natural. They do not value learning enough. And of course, your brain is a muscle, just like people don't realize this. If you decided you're going to work out every day for 20 years, and I decided I wasn't, but I was going to read every day for 20 years, and you weren't, 20 years down the line, if we go to the gym, you're going to kick my rear. You're going to do 20 reps, and I'm going to do a half a rep. You move into the mental side of it, I'm going to kick your rear because I've been exercising my brain, which is a muscle. And it's really fascinating because it'll take our Titan cup. Let's imagine that this table is all the information you could have in the world. And this is, that right there is how much information you have now. And you can reach a little bit beyond, what your current position. So So this whole table, maybe you can a couple inches around that. But as you learn, that grows, and things that you couldn't understand that were boring to you, all of a sudden, that's really fascinating. I know enough to be able, and not expert, but know enough I understand it enough for it to be fascinating. Of course, then your growing just starts compounding. But nobody at your work, except for a cashier company apparently, is going to give you a list of reading. And so what I started with was calling these, iconic people and saying, I'm assuming you're a prolific reader and you've read thousands and thousands and thousands of books, which is true. But it's also true that out of the thousands of books that you've read, there's 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 that for some reason have kind of become your go-to books. And so I said, will you just tell me what those are now? Like your son or daughter's going to follow in your footsteps. Let's just have them read those first, and then they can go on to the less ones after that. And these are the most iconic people on Wall Street. And they all got back to me within 2 or 3 days. One guy took his entire library and called his library and said, called his bookstore and said, buy these books, put them in my library, remove everything that I have. Because just like anything else, you want your reading to be the maximum productivity. And it was also fascinating, and I'll shut up after this, that people got like one guy want to come back, you just need to know all about leadership. Another person, you need to read the classics. Another group was you just need to be a genius. I kept, where are the finance books? And so it took all 8 of these people to sort of fill out every single category. For a while, I was kind of like, there's no theory books in here. Then Cliff Asness came in and filled that whole thing out from AQR. I started doing it with the British, and I realized we don't have any funny books. The Americans are not funny people. The Brits brought it all in. So, people would want to, reach out to you. We can get them that list if they're interested.
So 2 immediate follow-up questions. The first is, what book are you reading right now and why? And the second, and this will kind of transition the conversation a little bit, is you're 45 years in finance. What is something that you have learned in the last year that has really exercised your financial muscles? So we'll start with the book.
That book summary now. I'm reading a book about NVIDIA. It's a simple little book, but it just talks about the history of NVIDIA and the characters that are in it. I'm very, interested not in NVIDIA per se, but just in the fact that we're in an information age now, and we've left the age where technology is replacing physical labor. You guys pay for your physical labor now, to an age where it's replacing mental labor, and that's going to happen a lot faster. So that's one. And I'm also reading a book about the 5 types of wealth. As I'm reading this book, I'm always like, did I write this? Because, before we leave this section, the how do you make decisions is super important. That's one. Making decisions is the most important thing. How do you do it? Most people have no idea. Each time is totally different. I do some pros and cons. Well, what if one con is a nuclear bomb? And does it match up with your priorities? And I found this. I thought I came up with this, but I didn't, because other successful people have come up with it as well. And they put it in the same order, because it's the 5 F's: faith, family, friends, fitness, finance. So imagine those are 5 balls, and you can put them in any order you want, or you can remove some and not even use them. It turns out that the people who are the most successful have an order that's not intuitive. I'm not going to do anything that's not consistent with my faith. Full stop. Why is that? Because I'm not going to do things because of my faith. And also, if I can't act as a man of faith, I can't bring you my whole self. And my whole self is really pretty powerful, and my partial self is not. The second thing is I'm not going to, as family, I'm not going to do anything that ends up with my being divorced from my wife. It's just not anything that's important enough, or have a bad relationship with my kids. Just not. It's not. I don't have any definition of success, and I know it happens to good people and all that kind of stuff, and you can restore it. But there's no definition of success where I have bad relationship with my wife or children. Number 3 is we talked about friends. I'm not going to give up my high character, high quality friends to go and work for you. I'm going to keep them, and I'm going to add some more. And if I can, now I used to have 4 F's, as you can tell. I didn't have the fitness F in there. And so the fitness is this going to kill me mentally, physically, emotionally, or spiritually? If any of those are going to happen, then I'm out. But it's a gating system, not a waiting system for me. So if I'm not going to be a man of faith, I don't consider anything else. If it is, then I'll consider my family. If it passes those 2, friends, if it passes that, if it passes the health test, then I will say, all right, what was the job? And I approach every decision through that lens over and over again. And you would think, so if I ask you, so if I go that way, but one of you decides, I'm just going to go everything finance, and I'm going to sacrifice faith, family, friends, fitness. I'm just going to put all my chips on finance. Shouldn't you have an advantage over me, who is going through this gating system, and finance is the last thing that I consider? Who's going to be the better decision maker in finance? This is counterintuitive.
The holistic approach, and I think you referenced it as it relates to the whole you.
Yeah. And so you've got their whole self. And so if you're just the finance person, you're trying to consider a decision and you don't have faith, you don't have any family support, you don't have any friend support, maybe your health is terrible, you've got a lot of baggage. The best decision maker is not the one who's the most focused on one thing. The best decision is the one who comes with the least baggage to the decision. So I'm not having to worry about my faith. I'm not having to worry about my marriage. I'm not going to call my kids afterwards trying to, will you talk to me? I'm going to go out with friends afterwards. I'm reasonably healthy. I have no limited baggage. And so therefore I'm running free in terms of making decisions. That's super important.
So let's actually stay here on this topic just for a minute. Is this something that was always top of mind for you, or maybe talk a little bit about your career and your personal journey right now, and kind of how you've arrived at a book like that being of interest to you?
Well, first of all, I was very fortunate to have a really solid family foundation to begin with. Not a perfect family by any stretch of the imagination, but I did have 2 good parents and great brothers and sisters. And so in that security thing that you're talking about earlier on, that was just not ever a question. When my attitude always was, I just want to be the best wherever I am. If I'm in the controllers group, I want to be the controller. If I'm in the the accountants group, I want to be the CFO. If I'm in the treasury group, I want to be the treasurer. So from the very beginning, it's like I was very focused on doing a good job today. Not 10 years from now, not 5 years from now, not next year. I wasn't saying, here's my 5 or 10 year plan. The person who, it's not bad to have a general version of that. You better hold it kind of loosely. But the person who's effective is the person who makes progress every single day. So while people are looking up over the horizon, I was walking forward. I think you're always either macro or micro. I've never met anybody who's like equally both, unless they're both average at both of them. And so I'm definitely in the macro type. I'm not that interested in the micro. Other people, I'm glad other people are, because you got to have both. So that put me reporting to the highest level people pretty early. in my life. And so, I have a sister who's named Carla Harris. You didn't know about her. She's actually just a wonderful woman. She's the senior managing director of Morgan Stanley, and she's African American. And she's one of the top 50 speakers in America. And she has this one statement in her stump speech that's so powerful. She says, every decision that's going to be made about you is when you're not going to be in the room. Every decision made about you is you're not going to be in the room. So somebody's going to be representing you, and they're going to have a little 3x5 card, and they're going to write 3 words on there. And it's your job to lead them to write the words that you want on there. It's not their job to somehow figure it out, through some kind of mystery. And another thing that happens to people is they get completely inside the company. You need to have some, obviously you're totally devoted to your company. You're not a professional person, but you have some breadth, outside. So you're just not kind of a one trick pony. And this some is luck, right? So that's just how the starting foundation. And the way it works is, and we all come into the company, and we're all considered to be, good workers. And we all work for 4 different people, and it's very hard for any of us to break out. Because as soon as they try to break out his boss said, well, and what about him? And then he says, and so on. So the natural tendency is let's just keep all these people going up at the exactly same rate. So I don't want to go up the same rate. Yeah, I want to go up, faster when it's deserved. What happens is a lot of times, so they have 4 projects for the year. We each get 1. That's in the budget. And then mid-year, something comes along we didn't know about this. We didn't know about it. And it's this new project, and you can't give it to everybody. You got to give it to one person. And you have to be that person. And how do you become that person? First of all, by the way you behave along the way. You're very professional. You keep your word. What people don't realize is when you're in a meeting and the boss says, so have you got that? You're going to give me a red convertible at the end of the month for less than $65,000. I just use red convertible all the time. And you say yes, then I don't have to worry about it anymore because your word is good. But because people are such bad listeners, they're not professional enough, they'll miss their deadline. They'll come in with a red convertible for $100,000. Or what's most common is they'll bring in a green, Pontiac, and you're kind of like, what in the world, happened here? So good people who are really successful are good listeners. I'm going to throw a stat at you, which you guys know, which is what percent of what you hear do you actually retain in a typical talk, typical speech? Like what percent of this are you going to retain if you're a normal person?
I'm going to guess 10%.
Yeah. You're going to say something that looks like.
I was going to say less than 10. It's like 8 or 9. But
yeah. So remember they have this statement that's
9.4.
9.35. They have this statement that says, if you want them to understand anything, you got to tell them 10 times. You got to tell them 10 times. And it's kind of like, because you're not a very good speaker. No, it's because you could be Billy Graham, and the typical person only gets 10%. So if you're trying to create a competitive advantage for yourself, learn to listen better.
So Britt, you're arguably for sure top 5 most successful finance graduates from Texas A&M as far as your career. How'd you even make it to Wall Street? Like you were talking about a difference in your
All right,
college.
Good segue. So in that situation, we all have the same projects. The company decides to merge 5 subsidiaries, and each of these subsidiaries had $50 million, $25 million, $75 million. Not enough to really pay attention to, but when we put them all into one holding company, it was $330 million. And in this company, because this company, $330 million, means somebody has to look at it. But it's not big enough that somebody important needs to look at it. So I was perfect. I can look at it and I'm not important. But they had to select me from all the group. And so, and remember I talked about in the game. So now I'm in the game. I'm talking to all kinds of people. When people ask me how did I learn the business, I say on the bus. Now, what? You've all read Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour thing. So I know nothing. But today I'm going to talk to a U.S. equity manager, growth style or value style or something. And I'm studying on the way in, like, what is public? What does it mean public? What's equity? And then I ask this guy every question I can think of because he's trying to sell. And I'm young, and so I don't hold back. So he teaches me, and I say 3 or 4 of them during the day, and then I review it on the bus on the way back. Tomorrow it's fixed income. The next day it's leveraged buyouts. The next day it's venture capital. Then it's real estate. Then it's global, So preparation, listening, review. Preparation, listening, review. Preparation, listening, review. 3 years. And so the way I got to Wall Street is I come into the office one day. I'm working at a utility company. That's a great company and great people, but it's not the place that you leap to Wall Street from normally. And my colleague, guy's name is John Casey, when I walked in, said, Britt, that's great. Congratulations. Really proud of you. And I'm trying to pretend like I know what he's talking about. So I can find out what he's talking about. I have no idea. What are you talking about? And this is because the bar was so low. This is like 1987. I had just made the list of the top 25 investors in the entire country at 28 years old. So believe me, it's a totally different time and it's a lot easier. I don't think I could make it again today. But so that produced a conflict because Earl Nye, the head of, called me and said, great job here, but this is not an investment company. We want you to be a senior leader here. And we're going to set up a training program. So we're going to start a senior manager training program, and you're going to be the first person to go in it. And that means you're going to go out into the field to actually work with the people who actually do the work. And remember, I told you I just wanted to be the best where I was. So that's fine with me. I had to write letters. None of you, I don't know, y'all aware what a letter is? You had to write the letter to the people. And I wrote the letter saying, thank you so much for all the help. I'm moving on. And John Casey's taking over. Thank you very much. I thought that was the end of it. Well, then I got 7 letters back saying, if you're really going to move, would you consider A, B, C, or D? Now I'm in a service center, going out with meter readers and listen to telephone operators and construction workers. And I think I should, just to be polite, I should respond. Not that I was looking for anything. And so I'm looking around. There's no paper, no writing paper, and there's no pen. So this is how naive I was. I picked up a piece of typing paper and a pencil, and I wrote my resume out on pencil, in pencil. But if you have top 25 investor on it, that, people tend to overlook that. But I want to tell one story because I ended up moving shortly thereafter to take one of those jobs. But a seminal moment for me, remember I talked about how leadership was deteriorating. So I'm out there, they're treating me like I'm the child from the golden, tower. And when I actually got out to shovel with them, they're kind of like, what are you doing? I said, well, what are you doing? And we're shoveling. Well, we're all shoveling. But they were just teaching me so much. I said, they have a safety meeting. So there's always something you can do. And what can you bring? And so I said, could I have one safety meeting? Because you're teaching me all this stuff. I can tell you how the industry works. I can tell you what the company does. And I can tell you where you fit into it. Would you allow me to do that? And they were gracious enough to do that. It's a 1-hour meeting on Thursday morning. There's maybe 100 people there. And as they came in, I said, I know you don't know exactly how many shares of our company you have, but just take a guess and write it down and drop it in a bucket, and we will see what we got at the end of this. Then I just told them about the industry and all the things that the company and things like that. And then at the end, we counted up, and these guys had something like $50 million of company stock among all of them. These are long service employees. This is the dad, the mom, and when it was over, I've had a lot of wonderful things said about me, and I've had a lot of terrible things said about me, and I don't remember any of them hardly. But I sat down with the senior people after this discussion, and they said, Britt, we really hope you'll be the CEO of this company someday. And that meant a lot to me. And I have a hard hat to this day. I'm an honorary lineman. Any of you honorary lineman? No, you're not. And so I'd seen Earl Nye, I'd seen this, and then I go to this new company, and it turns out, I should have checked this out a little further, the company's going bankrupt. And we get acquired by another company from overseas. And as I said, they only kept 2 people. This is out of like 1,000 people. And there's this night when, at the end of work, we're going to have a party for everybody who's been laid off. And so I get up from my desk, and I'm leaving, there's somebody in my doorway. And so, I'm glad I caught you, Britt. I need you to sign this check as I'm on the way to the party for all the people who have lost their jobs. And I said, what is it? And they gave it to me, and it was a $20 or $25 million golden parachute check for our senior executive. And so what had happened was the other company had said, we'll make it worth your while to go ahead with this transaction. And he sacrificed, 900 people. And I just couldn't take it anymore. And so that's when we started the program. But so that got me up to Connecticut. And when you get to Connecticut, there's a street there where you just go down it, and it's like 20 Fortune 500 companies. And I got some awards, and I came up with some new strategies. And
Was that at Bridgewater?
well, if you want to go there, so that was, I went from Texas Utilities to a company called Asea Brown Boveri, which is Swiss and Swedish. And I had responsibility for 19 different countries. And there was a similar moment there because I got contacted by GTE, which is now Verizon, and a guy named John Carroll. And John Carroll was also on this list of the top 25, but he was the right age. And so he and I met, and I left there. He asked me for my resume when we were done, and I left there thinking he had no idea how young I am. And so it's just a pleasantry. So I didn't send him my resume. Then he asked for it again, and I didn't send it again. And this wasn't like I just didn't think it was important. And so now I'm with Asea Brown Boveri, 19 countries, traveling everywhere in the world. I had a fax machine in my office at home, which was the big deal back then. That's like early 90s or something. Like, I have a fax machine. It was not for business. It was so that my wife could fax me my kids' homework, things like that. So when I'm in all these faraway places, I can see what's going on. And I sat there with an offer from a company, a U.S. company, and an offer from an international company where I had more control. And GT had just been voted the most respected pension fund manager in the country at the time. And I said, I'm going to take this and and I'll be able to grade my kids' homework, right from here. When you go to companies, normally, if a new person's coming in, it means there's a problem in the company. I do think 99% of the time, if you have to replace your senior people with people from outside, you've done something wrong. You haven't prepared people inside for things that have not gone well. But every once in a while, you go to companies doing really well. And that's a completely different situation. So here I am, 32, and I'm ahead of the entire equity program, and every single person in the company is older than I am. Every single one. And I'm super enthusiastic. I'm in there like, we can do this, we can do that, we can do this, we can do that. And of course, the boss, so everybody gives you the passive aggressive. Sure. And then you realize, like, nobody's doing anything. And eventually I came to where I realized that I had never honored the past. When you come to a company, you either dishonor the past because the boat is sinking, you don't have time to play around, not the people, the boat, or you need to honor the past because they deserve it. So I was too young and naive to know that, but now I do. So I go back to them and say, you know what, I've been here for 6 months or whatever it was, and I've been learning. I need to apologize. Like, I didn't really realize all the things you guys have already done. I realized this is a big change that we're making here. But when I looked at what you've done, you made a big change 10 years ago. And you made another big change 5 years ago. So this must be old hat to you people. And I'm so lucky that I'm working with people who have already done this twice. And they said, all right, everything gets going. So these are just, because you've got about, I think you've got about 6 months maximum to make that first impression. And if you miss that 6 months, it's very hard to sort of go back and do it again. And when you're younger, you're going to make a lot of mistakes in that first 6 months. And when you're older, you're going to make a lot of mistakes in that first 6 months. But it's the one who sees the mistakes the quickest and, is transparent about it. You try to be as inclusive as you can, but you are the boss. And then they know this is not a democracy here, but it is inclusive. And one of the interesting things now is generational issues, because the younger generations have grown up differently than we grew up. And one of the things that I hear constantly is everyone should have a vote. Everybody should have a voice. Everybody should have a voice. And I'm sitting there saying, we're about to make $1 billion decision here. This is coming across to me like you want to vote for it. And to get past that, you have to call them in, put it on the table and say, this is what I'm hearing when you say this. And then in my experience, I said, oh, no, we didn't mean that we wanted to actually be the deciding vote. We just want to be included in the process. So you're in a world now where employees ask, I want to be empowered. You know what? A good boss wants to empower you. I want to empower you. I want to make you our starting pitcher. But if you've never picked up a baseball in the history of your life, and it's the World Series, we're not ready to go out there. Something else has to happen. So I'll finish this section with this. There's a lot more, but so we had to have an empowerment formula. And the formula was this: customer plus empathy plus development plus agreement equals empowerment. And what I meant was, it doesn't really matter to me what you think, how you think you did. It doesn't matter to the board how I think I did. What matters is how the customer think I did. And so, what does the customer think about how I'm doing? And so we have a thing called Next Operations Customer, NOAC. And then they say, well, I want to, I don't want to just be an order taker. Well, then earn the right to be a participant. And with your customers, treat them so well and do such a great job for them that they say, I'd like to hear what you have to say. And you don't just get it because you want it, you get it because you earn it. Number 3 is we have all kinds of development. And it's intended to get you to the next level. And you didn't take any of it. Or you took it all. And then the last one is agreement, which means that you're somebody who keeps your word. Like if you tell me, again, about red convertible, end of the month, 65,000 or less, it's going to be there. Everything's going to be fine, right? I don't have to worry about you not fulfilling your promise either because you're just not a promise keeper, or you're unable to receive the order correctly, or you get confused by it. And those principles, I've never seen them on any other company, but I encourage you to consider it.
So you're up in New York. I think you were at Vimco and then Ridgewater. Why'd you come back to Texas? And then the second question is, and I think you were a pretty big innovator in the finance world as it relates to partnerships. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
And so you talked about this innovation factor. And people think that innovation is, I've come up with something that nobody's ever thought of, nobody's ever done. It's totally out of the blue. 90% of innovation is not that. 90% of innovation is seeing something that's being done in some other area and saying, why aren't we doing that in our area? So remember, GTE was a top-performing fund. So my normal bag of tricks, they weren't sick. So, so I found a book on quality management. And it was the first time that people went out to actually benchmark other companies, including companies outside the industry. And so you'll have these epiphany moments. So I was able to go see the executives from Motorola. What does that have to do with? And they come trotting in, and a friend had sort of, I guess, forced them to be there. And you want to get asked questions that you are not used to answering. And I got this question, which was, what do you make? We make phones, and we're like, what do you make? And I was kind of, we make money so that you make phones. It didn't seem like that great of an answer. So that's later on. But then he said, how do you make it? I said, well, we do some ourselves, and we use other people around the world for the rest of it. And they said, oh, those are your strategic suppliers. I never heard the term strategic supplier before. I said, no, you don't understand. They're not strategic suppliers. They're necessary evils. Like, we don't even like them, but we just have to have them. And they said, well, what happens when you see them? I said, well, they try to tell us they're smarter than they really are. And we try to tell them that they're not as smart as they think they are. And again, I said, you want to get things out of your mouth that are in your head, and you say that, you think, that sounds horrible, but it's true. And so the industry was also changing where they were going from these boutique firms to, firms that had multiple products and services in there. And so I went back to Wall Street and said, I would like to create a first strategic partnership between an investor and, an organization that service investors. So JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, that whole crowd. No one had ever done this. Now, is this a genius move? No, it's just recognizing that there's something that is good to do and we're not doing it. But another trick is, so like you tell me, I don't know what it is, you don't know what it is. You tell me what you think it is, you tell me what you think it is, you tell me what you think it is, I'll tell you what I think it is. There were, I think, 8. And so now we have 8 versions of what we think it is, and you guys only have your version. This is kind of using the wisdom of crowds. So I'm going to take 2 of your ideas, 3 of your ideas, 4 of your ideas, 1 of my ideas, and create the best of both. But you have to arbitrage trust. And then that becomes innovation. And when I propose a strategic partnership in the company, this is a good story. I'm pretty young, and so I have my older, mentor, who's the CEO of the company, and I'm number 2. And so we go up to the treasurer, it's in New York, and I present my idea about strategic partnerships. The guy, is a rock type of person, and I mean, he's very blustery, and he listens to it, and he says, is that it? I said, yes, sir. And he literally takes my presentation, he stands up, he walks over to the trash can, he drops in the trash can. Now, what are you going to do when that happens? And I don't know how in the world I did this, but I did. I stood up when he said that. I stood up. I went, got it out of the trash can, went up, and I put it back on his desk and says, sir, this is what we need to do. And this is when you need the older guy. He looks over at John, Carol. John says, kid knows what he's doing. And that's how it got through. And now strategic partnerships are common all over the world. But innovation is not, I just came up with something out of the blue that nobody or it's taking things from other places that are good, that are not being used in your place. And, having the energy and the creativity and the desire to use them.
So speaking of innovation, I mean, we're living in an innovation age between AI and before AI, crypto. And I want to go back to this question of, what financial muscles are you exercising now? Because the world has certainly changed since you had a fax machine in your house.
Yes, it has. And it's going to continue to change. I had a chance to meet with the COO of Google's quantum computing division, 1 hour a week for like 3 months. And he said something I want to pass along about this. And he said, I said, well, what's the bottom line? And when I first heard what I'm about to say, I thought, that's it. That's all you got for me. But then it's very deep, actually. He said, technology is and always will be. That's the first thing you understand. Technology is and always will be. What is he saying? He's saying you can't stop it. You can't stop it. And so you have to learn you have to stay in control of it. You got to understand that in many ways it's a Trojan horse. It comes in with beautiful stuff into your house, but inside are things that are not beautiful. And they start creeping out afterwards. But there's no such thing as just going out and saying, well, pull the plug. So let's imagine that you're at the beginning of time, whenever you think that was. I don't really care. But at that time, physical labor and mental labor are kind of on the baseline. And as you move out, and the vertical axis is replacement by technology. And so what you saw was, for thousands of years, technology incrementally replaced physical labor until, let's just say, you get to the tractor, and you have a 500 horsepower tractor, because it's replacing 500 horses, which had 500 men with one tractor, and that ends the agricultural era. But during all that time, nothing had really changed about your need for mental labor. Society was still the peasants and the royals. The GDP growth of the world was 0.1%. 0.1% means zero. We'd only gotten to 1 billion people in all that time. And yet here in the last couple of hundred years, we've boomed up to 8 billion. I love analysis, and I've said it, I don't like analysis. I need to have a looking glass to see it. And it goes like this, it goes like that. So, there's probably something you want to look at here. And so now, every one of you probably pays to get exercise. Now you say things before you go to work, like, honey, I got to work out before I go to work. Or you get home from work, don't serve dinner yet. I need to work out for dinner. You know what that would sound like 200 years ago? Like you are insane. But we have totally, for the developed world, eliminated physical labor with technology. And what I really think is important for us all to realize is we're now solidly in the beginning part of technology replacing mental labor. And that's a totally different story. And it's going to happen faster than people realize. There are a set of questions in the 40s or 50s that never got resolved in the scientific community. And it was this: is technology here to enhance humanity, or is technology here to replace humanity? It never got resolved. Now, you would say, nobody would want to replace humanity. This is not some kind of sci-fi show. That's true, but you might want to lower the number of employees you have in your company. And you might do the same, and it's the same thing. I was talking to a really great business person. I'm not going to name him. And I said, how are things going in your company? He said, they're really going great. I said, can you give me some examples? He said, today, I just gave 800 of our employees new technology that I think is going to triple or quadruple their productivity. Fantastic. But he didn't stop talking. He said, and today we laid off 800 people. So if all of a sudden you guys can do twice, like we're all doing a quarter of the work, and now you two guys can do twice the work you did before, and then you're doing all the work that we used to do together. And so they have to decide, are we still going to hang around, or how can they make the additional employees productive? And productivity is what we really need in this country, and we really haven't had it with all of our technology. So if you're going to understand markets, you have to accept a couple of things, I think. And this is me talking. This is my story, that we're not in the same era we were in from 1980 to 2000. As you go through time, you go through these long eras. And, you go from high interest rates to low interest rates to high interest rates to low interest rates. I mean, that's the inflation cycle. And so when I came into the, employment, it's 1980, the discount rate was sitting at 20%. The PE multiple on the S&P was like 8 times. The inflation rate was 14 or 15. Long bonds were 14 or 15. The debt service was 4% of GDP. Debt service meaning the interest payments on the debt that you have. And debt to GDP was 30%. That's 1980. Fast forward. By the way, that's because we've had rapidly rising inflation. One of the main reasons was that we had oil embargo, and people who criticize the energy industry in this country don't know their history, because in 1980 we were totally dependent on other countries for our energy, and you can only grow according to the energy capacity you have. And so OPEC, we were totally dependent on OPEC. And if you'd ask anybody in 1980, if you'd ask, I will, whatever odds you want, I'll take it. We'll never be energy independent again. You could not get anybody to take the other side. It's just like a non-starter. Like, this is just the way it is. Well, between 1980, the S&P, you'll love this. The S&P was at 109 when I graduated. Now it's 6,800 or something like that. The oil price when I graduated was $35. It was $35 just a few years ago. So how in the world do you go from energy dependent to energy independent with no price change? And it's because the technological miracles that actually occurred primarily in the energy sector. And of course, then fracking came along, and that's an Aggie thing, I must say. And we took 7% market share. We took 7% market share away from OPEC. And in November, I think it was 2014, they have these OPEC meetings. And everybody knows what's going to happen in these meetings is they're going to figure out what the supply and demand is, and they're going to come out, and Saudi Arabia primarily is going to balance that out, because that's kind of this unwritten agreement. You keep the oil price stable and flowing, and if you have problems, we'll come and defend you. It's not a law. It's not written down anywhere, but that's just what it was. But they just lost 7% market share, so they came out and essentially said, you know what? The deal is off. That's called moral hazard. Moral hazard is when the price stays a certain place because of some other arrangement that causes it to stay where it is through some other than natural market forces. So we were doing a deal, and I think the price of energy was $90 or something like that, $100, somewhere in there. And we'd done a downside analysis. Like, we can still make 10% if the oil price goes to $60. Well, then when they came out and said it's now going to go to market factors, you guys remember what happened? It went to zero. It blew through our $60, immediately. And because now we're in this competitive environment, but it's also energy. You always have to remember that you only grow as fast as the energy supply that you have.
So you mentioned this period from 1980 to 2000 that we're not in that same period, but 2000 was 25 years ago. Was there another period between 2000 and 2025? Are we is this new
same period? It's the same period. And so, sorry, I got off in the left field there. So just start with a discount rate.
Yep.
20%, 1980. What was it in 2020?
0.
That's as far as you can go. I'm not a mathematical wizard, but
well, actually, I thought the Swiss went to negative. Did they go?
And that was a total disaster. And actually, something like 85% of all bonds in the world that were sovereign had a negative interest rate. I don't even know how that works, but it didn't work. And our Fed has said we're never going to go negative. So we're going to either go sideways or we're going to go up. So I think of this as like a ski. We went up this mountain in the late 70s. People thought we were going to go over the cliff because of this rampant inflation. Paul Volcker came in, slayed the inflation, and we're sitting there with our ski gear on at a 14,000-foot mountain. And for 40 years, we skied down that mountain to zero. And every time, and there were some bumps along the way, but it was all one directional. And every time you went to a lower altitude or you lower the interest rate, you got a higher multiple. And even if it didn't change the earnings, like the multiple is now % lower, so the earnings are going to go up. And then, so you're talking about a multiple changing from 15% to 2%. Over half of the gain in the S&P 500 over that period of time was multiple expansion. And so we also had, I know you want to talk about the Federal Reserve, so I'll give you an opening here. We also had the Federal Reserve at our back. The Federal Reserve is very good at preventing, dealing with this. They can lower interest rates very easily and have a pretty quick effect. And so if you start out with interest rates at 15%, now you can lower them by 200 basis points, and you're still at 13. You still have a lot of this. You should consider this like this: how many bullets do they have in their gun belt? Because when bad stuff happens, those interest rate changes are bullets that they're firing to stop the fall, or they're turning around, firing to keep them going too high. But this whole time, so think of it. I have a really sophisticated view of the markets. Markets are a catamaran. And a catamaran, has this beautiful centerpiece, and it has these two pontoons on the outside. And the pontoons you don't need the pontoons when the weather is good and everything is smooth, and you sip your margaritas and you tan and you play music. And that happens about 65% of the time. But when things go wrong, they can go wrong to the deflationary side, when you don't have enough demand for the supply that you have. And so, let's just say I don't have enough demand for housing because the interest rates are 10% in those days. But if I could make them 8% by lowering the rates, all of a sudden, more people can buy a house, plus people can go bankrupt. They can stay around for a while. And so for this entire 40 years, we sailed this portion of time in good weather, and 9% of the time that we didn't have good weather, it was all in this direction. May have all been in this direction. And so we finally got down to the zero bound, where from that perspective, the Fed's out of ammo when it's at zero. The Fed wants 500 basis points of cushion or 500 basis points of bullets. So for 25 basis points, so you got, is that 20 bullets? I want 20 bullets in my gun belt before anything bad happens. Because that's how I've found that's enough for me to eventually blow this thing out. And so the Fed was able to be on our side that whole time. Now we're at the bottom of the ski run, and the Fed is not going to be able to be on our side all the time. Right now we have all this controversy. Do you want to get this now or you want to wait?
Yeah, let's hear it.
The first thing is just to recognize that in general, there's no law about this, but the Fed wants to be able to get the discount rate to 5% after any kind of thing. When a bad thing happens, we use summer bullets. When it's over, we raise it till we get to at least 5%. And so they got it a little over 5. And now we're on the way, down again. And we're in this middle ground.
Do you think we are on the way down?
Well, for rates,
yes,
that's what the market is expecting.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, market's expecting 2 more.
We've gone from 5.25 to 4.25.
Yeah,
I believe.
And they're pricing in 2 drops in 25.
Yeah, and so you're hearing all this. You guys got to lower rates. Just wait 2 months, and it's already discounted. And there's another one after that. But the Federal Reserve's job in America is to keep economic growth stable, and to keep the interest rate, stable and low. Now, this is important because Europe only has one of those two. Europe doesn't have anything to do with economic activity; just kind of keep the interest rate low. And the reason they want that is they're going to keep their rich people rich. But we also have full employment as part of ours. And so we're at a point now where, I think you're sitting around the table, like 6 guys said we should lower it. 6 people say we should, not lower it. And the Fed, if I was the Fed chairman, I'd say, well, I don't want to fire these bullets if I don't have to. Now, these bullets are meant to be there for when I really need them. And the economy's expected to grow, 2%, I think, next year, and inflation's under control. I don't need to fire these bullets right now because even though the Taylor rule and different things say I could, I don't need to. And so I'm choosing to keep my bullets, available to me because it's not really that bad. And if I fire them now, some people might say it will never get bad, but more than likely it will get bad at some point. You just won't have as much ammo. And for the Fed's independence to be called into question by any political official, and I'm a Republican, is foolhardy and extremely dangerous. The minute the world gets a sense that our Federal Reserve is not independent, that it's controlled by politicians, our dollar will crash. Our dollar will crash. Confidence in the dollar will just go to zero. And we're already, this last year, we had the biggest, this year so far, we've had the biggest depreciation in the dollar in the last 40 years already, just because people have some notion that could be in it. Just imagine that all of a sudden politicians got to weigh in on this. Well, I've got my, I want to spend a lot of money on climate change. Well, let's get the Fed to finance it. I want to spend on my pet project. Well, let's get the Fed to finance it. It'd just be terrible. But the typical person has no way to understand this. And the President of the United States just says, they're just trying to keep us from growing. And there's some points that, if you make these points over here and leave these out on this side, you don't give the information people need to really understand it. What do you think?
So I was going to ask that the argument against Powell was that he was slow to raise rates on inflation, of course, with COVID and all that kind of stuff, caused a lot of spending. And the argument it would be that he's now slow on the back end to lower them. So he's just some Fed chairmans probably fire too quickly, and some are just going to be a little bit more conservative and slow. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's who knows if you're too slow or too fast. But the inflation rate is coming down. and it's projected, to obey. I don't think it's going to get down as low as people think, but it's going to get pretty low.
I want to ask you about the inflation rate because I know the Fed is looking at their Excel spreadsheets and looking at all of the numbers. There's so many people here listening to this podcast who are saying, my food prices keep going up, the cost of meat, the cost of eggs, housing prices continue to they're leveling off now, but they're very, very expensive. If the Fed lowers rates, typically there's an inverse correlation between the asset value of a home with the with the rate changes going down. The lower the rate, typically the higher the value of the home. So you're looking at food, shelter, and clothing. Clothing probably has the inflation on that has remained flat, but on food and shelter, what has been the impact of the Fed, and does the Fed even think about just those two as being the primary sensitivities to young families and new family formation, et cetera?
Well, interested in y'all's opinion as well. The real estate part of it, is proxied by rents, so it's not based on housing prices. But you remember something that I think nobody would realize is these are human beings, and why do I say that now? In the 2007-2008 period, we had a huge bubble in debt related to real estate. And there are two types of bubbles. There's productive and unproductive. So we had a bubble in tech and telecom in 2000, but it was productive. And so we could use that to sort of earn our way out.
To say more on that, what do you mean for the audience when you say it's a productive bubble?
Well, like we had a completely new technological infrastructure, new computers, all that kind of thing. But now, in 2007, 2008, we just had this huge bill. And the bill was related to real estate. So normally when you lower rates, the first thing you stimulate is residential real estate. But residential real estate for the first time ever was the problem. And so lowering rates, didn't stimulate residential real estate until 10 years later. And so what happened was the Fed, in their last resort, had to fill in for that part of the process that real estate was not able to fill in. So I think this is just me talking. I heard this from anybody, they're going to be a little more reluctant to try to jump ahead of anything regarding to residential real estate. And because we got into that situation, you had the longest expansion that we've had in history, 10 or 11 years, long expansion in history, but it was also the lowest. What people, I don't think, really realize is that's the perfect environment for stocks. When you get that environment with just enough GDP and just enough inflation, and you're just kind of barely in that zone, but you're in it, the history of the stock market goes up 15% a year while that's happening. And if you look back at that period of time, the stock market went up 13 to 15% a year. But what I told, I've got so many things wrong, I got to mention one thing I got right. I went to our board in 2010. I said, look, here's how this is going to work. I'm going to use a plain example. We used to go to Austin Airport and we get in a jet plane and we fly to New York at 30,000 feet. We get there in 3.5 hours. That's where our economy was. That's not the way our economy is. We're now going to get into a helicopter and we're going to fly at 10,000 feet, and it's going to take a lot longer, but we're still going to get there. But when we have some volatility, if you have 10,000 foot drop from 30,000, it's, you don't like it, but it's kind of like 20,000. But you have a 10,000 foot drop and you're flying at 10,000, it's a little bit different. And so that is the economy that we're in. Then, just when we got over that, the virus comes. Now, it's best to think of monetary policy and fiscal policy as dragons that we have to bring out to slay whatever the problem is. And so, from the end of World War II to until around 2000, we just brought out the monetary dragon And the monetary dragon got more and more powerful. It came out in the 40s, and it was like a baby dragon. We didn't really know how to ride it. By the time it got to 2000, like this is a big bag, fully mature dragon, and we think we know how to ride this thing, but it's not enough. It's not enough to now deal with the size of the problem. So we bring out the sister dragon, which is fiscal policy, and the two of them, blow fire, and they get this thing out. So now you got both of them out, and then you have the 2007, 2008. We were very close to depression. One of the things that, it's like if we avoided depression, then nobody knows how close we were to a depression. So you do the right thing, and you avoid the bad thing, but nobody knows how close you were to the bad thing. And so they think you're too slow or, whatever it is. But in that case, both of the monetary and fiscal were on full force. We put more stimulus into the economy than at any time in history. And the Federal Reserve thinks it's undefeated. You go back to World War II to today, they have blown out every problem. So you might not like the way they did it or that they did it, but in their mind, they've won every game. They're undefeated. Some games were harder than others, and the 2007, 2008 was the hardest. But, the next week, everybody comes in, let's have some punch, let's have some cake, nice job, everybody. Nice job, everybody, So let's celebrate today, but tomorrow, let's come back and assess what we should do now that we know what we know now that we didn't know then. And this is where I felt probably the most stupid in my investment career. Because they wrote a page in, like a playbook, that said, we blew this thing out, but we started too small and we started too late. So next time, start big and start early. Then we don't have a problem for 10, 11 years. Then all of a sudden, over the transom comes not the virus. That wasn't the reason that we went down. The virus caused the President of the United States and all the other potentates around the world to say something that had never been said, ever. Stop everything now. What? Excuse me? Stop everything now. So we forced ourselves into a recession that was declining at 32% on an annualized rate in the second quarter. 45 million people unemployed, just like that. Sort of a shock to the system. And so I'm sitting there saying, well, it normally takes, 9 months to, 14 months to kind of get back to where we're back on sides. And yet so March of that year was the fastest decline of the stock market in history. There were only two comparable times. One of them was the Depression. The other one was 1987, which is an event. So kind of, is this a depression or is this an event? And all of a sudden, I think it was and the Federal Reserve was having to break the law in order to keep the financial system liquid, even barely liquid. They said we could use, I think CCC, rated bonds in the energy sector because the markets were completely frozen. The reason that people get mad at the Fed because they seem like they're catering to banks, it's because if they don't keep the banks up and running, you're not going to be able to do anything. That's just unnecessary. If the banks can't operate, then you can't operate. Now, banks are not the most important thing, but without them, nobody can do anything. So it looks very strange, and everybody gets upset about it. I totally get it. But if they don't do that, then you're not going to get your money. And so they have to do it. So during the last week of March, we're just in this catastrophic market's going down 7%, 8% every single day. Guys, and I'm managing $100 billion, and I don't even know where we are. And we don't have our gauges because this is happening inside a month, and we're sort of flying blind. And then all of a sudden, come out and say, we're going to open the spigots on monetary and fiscal policy, and we brought the biggest, stimulus in the history. We brought as much stimulus in the first few months as the entire time that we put stimulus in the previous time. And the market from April the 1st to the end of the year doubled. Doubled. Now, again, there's no way people can know all this stuff, but 1.5% real GDP growth and below is Japan. And so if you look back from 1980 forward, every expansion that we had was on average 80 basis points below the previous expansion. And the expansion we had before the virus hit was 2.1. Again, not being a mathematical wizard, I'm pretty sure 2.1 minus 80 basis points is below 1.5. We cannot go there. This is, you cannot risk going there and getting stuck there, because then we're looking at like 10, 15, 20 years. When I trade the Japanese market at 39,000 in the late 80s, and it didn't get back to 39,000 until last year. So there are factors that are going on that the general population doesn't. I don't know why we don't tell them, but if you cannot allow something to happen, then you do whatever it takes to make sure that doesn't happen.
So based on that, pretending we're back in like 2010, but you fast forward, it's 2025. You were sitting in that board meeting and you were saying, let me tell you how this is going to play out. It's going to be a helicopter at 10,000 instead of the jet. If we're the board, what are you telling us right now?
Well, right now, we have the economy mapped out back for 80 years, and the economic environment that we're in today is fine. It's actually there's an economic environment that we're in 54% of the time. So when we show it as a box and with 9, like a square with 9 boxes, but you really should think of it as a target, like you're throwing darts, and that middle part is every single person who throws at this dartboard is trying to hit, that center part. And going back 80 years, we've hit that center piece 54% of the time. And you might say, well, that's fantastic, 54% of the time. Or you might say, oh my gosh, what about the other 46? But we're in that box. And so remember last year, so our model said last year that we were in this sort of a safe zone in January, and they never changed the entire year. And so while everybody was calling for recession and all these various things, it didn't happen. And the stock market went up 25%. In that scenario, it normally goes up 18%. So this is just to build up to where we are now. So we were overweight in January of 2024, 75. We're overweight 15 points of equity. It was 75-25, no cash. And because the economic environment didn't change, and we don't rebalance, and that's heresy, but there's a reason for it. So, and we also have 2 other models, a bubble model and a bear market model. And because we're trying to pay attention to the things that, we don't mind losing 100 basis points on a stock here or there. We're looking for things where we lose 25% on the whole shooting match. But we have neither a bear market signal nor a bubble signal for the entire year. So we end up last year at 83.17. Now, if we had 83.17 going into the first quarter, for the first quarter, we got our head handed to us.
83.17, that's an allocation?
Yeah, 83% S&P 500, 17% 10-year Treasury bonds. But in early January, we got a bubble signal on the Mag 7. And the Mag 7, people talk concentration, it's true. The Mag 7 then and pretty much now is 38% of the S&P 500. And we have 83%. So I think the math turned out to be like 31% we had to sell and redistributed into bonds and cash, and we held that position until and we also took what we had in the S&P 500 cap weighted and moved into equal weighted, and that helped for a while. And then you have this, with the markets, you always have these things that come out of the blue, and so obviously tariffs come out of the blue, and I believe that the performance that Wall Street put on, which is normally actually pretty good performance, the performance that Wall Street put on during that first quarter was terrible. I mean, talk about. So the way I would phrase it to you is, there are two types of auctions. You're from the East Coast, you go to Sotheby's auctions, and they're very genteel. Thank you, madam. Would you like to bid, sir? We'll wait for you while you take your phone call, please. And they're going bidder, bidder, bidder. We have auctions of Mustang horses where they start out with astronomical prices going, ha! Yeah! And everybody's going, what in the world is happening here? And it's chaotic. We're running a Mustang horse auction, not a Sotheby's auction. And if you don't understand that, then you're just unwilling to think that people could do something any other way than what you think is normal. And I don't know what it takes for them to realize this. So April 2nd, I think it was, everything goes crashing down. What is it, 1 week or 2 weeks later? It's kind of, okay, we're not going to be 50%, maybe 10 or 20%. I don't know why people are surprised by that, because they've never been to a Mustang auction. And they have such a bias against the president that people want to believe the worst. And I don't know. I'm not saying that I know exactly what's totally right about everything. But again, just remember that fulcrum moment in March of 2000 when the Fed suddenly surprised everybody and fled, and the market went up 100%. The Magnificent Seven went up 21%, between that moment and the end of the quarter. Growth stocks outperformed value stocks 17-3. This is a slaughter. It's an absolute slaughter. We got another signal in the first part of last end of April, kind of moved one box over, a little lower box. Basically said, get back to base, like we were playing tag, get back to whatever you think the base is. And so we luckily went back to cap weighted. And so our performance so far, in the year and a half, cumulative is 18% cumulative. And the alpha that we have cumulative is 700 basis points.
And when you talk about you're talking about your new fund on Eagle's Wings.
Yeah. So let me just talk about, what I've been doing lately, meaning the last couple of years. So number one is I turned 65, and there's two philosophies about what you should do when you get to 65. The philosophy forever and ever and ever was, you get to 65, you just check out. And in the beginning, it was because you're not going to be around for much longer, so get your funeral, prepared. But now, if you get to 65, you're probably going to live into your 80s. Not guaranteed, of course. And we've never made any adjustments for that. So I have since then, you get better and better in your life about prioritizing the right things and actually having priorities and being able to stick to them a little bit better, at least for me, because I'm not a very disciplined person normally. And so I have and you guys all know this, I have a 3 cheeseburger, life plan. And so it's because everybody can visualize everybody knows what a cheeseburger is. And so the bun has to be there, or everything that you're trying to do is just going to be very messy. You're not going to be able to control it. It just kind of goes everywhere. So for me, I have to strengthen my spiritual life and I have to strengthen my physical life. And if I don't do that, then nothing inside is going to work. Inside, and this is going to end up with the company, there are 3 priorities. Number one is I need to spend more time with my wife. The if you have unusual success, if you deserve or don't deserve either way, you don't get paid more money and to have more time. You don't get paid more money to have less stress. And so I love my wife dearly, but I'm in a job where, I wasn't home at 5:00. And so of course it's her problem because her love language is time. I just said, just switch it to gifts. And she said, no. So priority number one is to spend time with her, my grandchildren, and my rest of my family. The second priority is to endow Titans. So I wanted to go on, after I'm not able to do it anymore, which is not anytime soon, I hope. But so we're going to try to raise $2.5 million for each school to endow it. And then the third is to start a new company called On Eagle's Wings Investment Advisors. So, the scripture, On Eagle's Wings comes from the Old Testament. And we're soaring on the angel wheels. We never get tired. We see everything. And remember, I really am probably the longest serving, fund, global fund manager alive today, which means everything up until now, I've seen it. Good, bad, and I've done a lot of the good and I've done a lot of the bad. And so I have a pretty strong opinion now about, I only want to do the good. And so we have a strategy that is nobody else has. And when people see it, they're kind of like, this is never going to work, because we've decided years and years ago that this was never going to work at a different point in the market, in a different era, and with different tools. And so right now, the way that what's happening in the markets, particularly at the upper end, and family offices and things like that, is just become very complex, very illiquid, levered, and expensive. A lot of us have to achieve a certain rate of return so that people get their pensions and things like that. And you should have been with me in meetings along my career where we'd go in and say, we say we're going to make 8.5%. Interest rates are now 2%. There's a pretty good possibility we're not going to make 8.5%. So you need to lower the benefits, or you need to put in more money. And they're kind of like, what? And you go around and around, and eventually someone would say, did you say you absolutely couldn't make 8.5%, or you probably couldn't? I said, I probably couldn't. I said, so there's a chance, that's what the actor is. There's a chance, you're going to make it, which of course we did do. But that caused people to, when the rate of return gets low and you have to make a certain higher number, you really only have three choices. One is make the whole thing much more aggressive. Raise your equity exposure from 60% to 80%. Number two is leave things the way they are, but take a lot of your public stuff and put it in the private markets to get the illiquidity premium. The third is, and so that's private equity. And then the third is lever what you have. And that's risk parity. So it's all this stuff that's going on. That's all that's happening. Nobody really went for the higher equity, which is what we should have all done. And so now we're in a situation where the private part of the markets are struggling. And one thing that's hard to learn is that no matter how attractive something is, in the beginning, there's a certain amount of capital that's the right amount. Let's say it's $100. It's a good thing. It needs $100 in capital. But in these situations, just like the internet, they get 300 in capital. And so at some point, somebody realizes, oh, wait a minute, we should have put 100 in this and we put 300. And they have to, take it off they have to get that 200 back. So people ask, whether the Yale model is going to go forward. And for your guess, the Yale model was developed by David Swinson, one of the all-time greats at Yale. And it basically was using this illiquidity premium and, highly active management. It did really well. Sadly, he passed away a few years ago. But Yale just sold, over $2 billion of the private markets. So when some people say, is the Yale model going to go forward? And kind of like, can't go forward when Yale's not doing it? They can still call it. And you have to know that, and the Yale's one of the better private equity investors, and they went through the secondary markets. So right now, people do not want to sell what they have because they know that they probably can't sell it at the prices where it's marked. And so there's this thing called extend and pretend. If we can hang in there for another year, maybe this will get corrected. Maybe it will. Probably won't, but maybe it will. But when people go to the secondary markets, and this is a high-quality Yale portfolio, it's sold at 11% discount.
Wow.
So that, to me, is a very good clue that pretty much everybody is 10 or 11%, 10 to 15% too high. And unless something happens, they're going to eventually, because distributions, we know with vintage year what we should get back based on how far long it was. So the 2019 vintage year, we should have back 90% of our money. 65% is what we have back. And for every vintage year forward, no vintage year we have back the amount of money that we should have back based on previous cycles. And then there's this monstrous amount of dry powder. There's only one way, really, and private equity is now, for the last 3 years, underperformed public equity by pretty good margin. But their 5-year number is still good, and a 10-year number is still good. But in 2 more years, that 3-year will turn into a 5-year number. And so they're on the clock now for something to happen in these next 2 years to get them so that their 5-year number looks decent. The only way that's probably going to happen, and this is counterintuitive, is if we have a big bear market. Mm-hmm. Because when you have a big bear market, the market will fall between 30 and 60%. But because of the way private equity is marked, it'll fall about 60 or 70% of that amount, and that will get them back on side. But this doesn't mean every single private company is not going to be able to get there, but the average one, it's not looking good for the next couple of years. And
so, word of caution, and we'll probably close with that. Unfortunately, not too uplifting point. Britt, thank you so much for sharing your words of wisdom. I know I speak on behalf of these guys when I say we've learned so much from you. And, when you leave the room and we make some notes on a 3x5 card, I think each and every one of us, and probably the 1,000 titans that are out there, will all say that as great of an investor as you are, the best investment that you've ever made is in the people and the relationships that you've touched along the way. So thank you very much for that.
My pleasure. I totally agree with you.